Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. So, what are we going to talk about in this video? Well, you've seen the title, you already know. We're going to talk about working smarter, question mark, or working harder, question mark, right? This video is not going to be long. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'll share some stories and make it a little longer. but but working smarter, not harder. It's kind of a misnomer, right? Because if you're trying to be smart, I mean, your mind's working harder, okay? And if you've ever read and you were analyzing or you were trying to figure out problems and all of these things, you can exhaust yourself just as quickly sitting in a chair reviewing material and trying to do some deep analysis, right? And or editing and putting things together, all the many facets that we can get into. But but we can get just as equally, work just as equally, working on property and digging out holes and doing fence posts, and if you're working on a farm or whatever, right? And I'm using some of these pretty obvious examples, right? Where we can work pretty hard, right? And then we see this whole thing, work smarter, not harder. Well, again, it doesn't really apply. Sometimes it's being smart to work harder, okay? and sometimes you have to shut off the notion that when you're doing that intense, say, content work or editing or problem solving, or if you're writing material, technical manuals, engineering, creating things, doing CAD, all those things, you're in the box, you're doing the thing, and that's hard work. But it's different, and really what it is being able to shift. Okay, folks, pinnacle shift. That's hello. It's the shift, right? It is shifting, right? Wearing multiple hats. You're in balance. You're walking the middle path, right? But you're shifting. There are times when maybe you have to be on your computer and you're doing work, right? And some folks don't have as many options. Okay, let's be clear about that. Some people are, maybe 90-10, doing the hard work, to maybe 10%, doing their computer work and all that stuff. And then it could flip, right? We have some people who are just the opposite of that. 90% on the computer, maybe 10% they're doing, some work, laborious work, we'll say, right? So, and then you're going to have variations. And what we have to understand is there's many elements to this, but your mind does need to shift. I highly recommend that if you're a person who has to do a lot of sit down work on the computer, if you can't, and this isn't this isn't a rule. I'm just expressing my experience. Your body and your mind need to reset. Okay, you need to reset. You need to, every about 3 hours or so, if you can make it 2 hours, great. But you'd say 3 hours. Every 3 hours, you need to shift. So what does that mean? It could mean that you organize your work, especially if the flexibility to do this. You shift your work. I remember I would, come in, obviously get up to speed, because I would already have, the early, day shift would come in. I would already have a few hours of productivity and all this going on. So I already have a little bit of email and all these things and performance stuff to kind of just do a quick snapshot on, right? But you only get so much out of your computer. And I wouldn't do 3 hours right out of the gate, but I would do probably about 45 minutes of doing that. And then, then walk the site. Okay. You got to walk the site. Now, this is in lieu of daily management walks, okay, which we would do later, right, as a team, as a leadership team, and so forth. But this is just me. So I could go around the site and I could see how things were going, check up with folks and say, hey, how's everything working for you? And I'm giving you this, okay? How are you? Kind of open ended. Creates, I mean, don't get me wrong, you do want to know how people are doing, okay? How's it going? How are you? That kind of thing. But how's everything working for you? If you don't elicit an opportunity from your people, people will gravitate to not wanting to come across as complaining or things aren't okay and all this. They want to kind of, they want to be like, oh, I got this, right? No, no. How's everything working for you? Is there anything that could be better, right? Now, you're not going to do that every day with every person. That would be annoying, right? But you're going to be present for them and you're going to do these things. Then after you do that for a little while, you're going to find what people will offer it up. People will offer, how are things going today? Then you get people open to whatever. And now by the time you get done doing, and different sites, and let me be clear too, it wasn't like I could walk the entire site every day. Okay. There may have been like, hit this, third or quarter or sometimes half if I was really, on top of my game. And maybe on a Friday or something like that, I would hit the whole thing because it's like before the weekend comes and there's also other things to consider, right? But you would do that. And I'm telling you what, folks, the connections that you make with people, okay? You build that rapport, you build up those connections, you start solving some of the problems, right? Because some of the things you can resolve for them. Also highly recommend, plugging them, non-paid advertisement here. Motorola radios, pull out the radio, boom, get somebody, if it's a maintenance fix or whatever it is, right? And solve the problem, right? And then as you go, you want to empower your processes to be such that your people are doing this, right? Obviously, that's where you go. But if you're starting out, right, or if you're starting to, new to that site as a site leader or department leader, you don't have to be the site leader to do this. It might be your department, maybe your production manager, whatever. But whatever your role, whatever your scope is, you do want to touch base with your team, right? Because you want to be able to, catch and resolve these things and allow their day to move smoothly ahead. Your reputation will then become one of, hey, he helps us to get things done, right? And you're there for your customers. And guess who's serving your customers? Your team. And guess who's supposed to be serving your team? You, if you're the site leader for sure. And then it graduates from there, right? So that's a smarter and harder mixed together, right? And then mix it up. There's some days you're not going to come in and do the rounds, right? Right out of the gate. Priorities do kind of shift, right? And we have to shift sometimes with those, but not vastly. But hopefully we got enough control of the ball. The other thing too is at the end of the day, doing a good site visual. Now, this I recommend. Yeah, great. If you're a site leader, you can't do it all, okay? You're going to have to delegate some of these things. So between your support staff and between your departments and your quality, you got enough folks out there to rotate it in such a way that people are doing a good walk around with a facility check, making sure things are right and tight and that things are safe, right? Safety first and then everything right and tight, right? Clean, neat, serviceable, right? Because we can't have people tripping over things. We can't have tools getting lost. We can't have, foreign objects, and all kinds of things ruining our product, right? Especially if we're dealing with moving parts. These sorts of things, right? It might be your maintenance team or leadership, whatever. However you're set up. Now, if you're working in an office, you're at a doctor's office or a clinic or whatever, all those sorts of things. It's just a variation to the same notion, folks. I've said before in some videos a while back, look, folks, a value stream is a value stream, okay? Part of our humility, okay, and being humble is we're not special. We take in materials. We do things. We serve our customer. Maybe it's a service. Maybe it's we create for them products, right? And then service the customer. But it's a value stream. A value stream is a value stream. And then what you plug into that value stream, and then how you manage the flow in a functional way. But then we have the human element on top of that, right? Because they are doing this. You're not, any one person's not doing this. This is where the team effort comes from. This is why, if you're a site leader, or program manager, or whatever, that you understand, hey, I take care of my folks take care of the customer, right? And you get into that, you've heard it called servant leadership, right? And that is true. There's an element to that. But again, there's a shift, right? Sometimes you have to direct. If you're a director, right, you direct. But then there are other times you're there to be able to wear a different hat and support your team, help problem solve, and expedite some of the constraints out of their way, especially if they're go-dos right now. If they're not, then a lot of that stuff will translate into your daily management walk, okay? It's too much to get too comfortable sitting in a seat all day. And I don't mean comfortable, but I mean to get you're in a silo. You just put yourself in a silo is all you're doing. And all you're doing really is just widening the gap between you and the rest of your team. And you could be a team member doing this too, folks. This isn't necessarily just for leadership, specific, but you could be a functional, right? You could be an engineer, right? You could be IT. You could be any of those, so HR, whatever. But usually HR is getting inundated with things. So, but it doesn't matter if you're not the leader, right? Or a leader of a department. Everybody, if you think about it, can get caught up in these silos, right? You can get caught up in a silo even if you're one of the broader team members and you're not communicating. Well, the more you're not communicating to your leadership about things that aren't working and issues and this and that, well, if I complain, I don't want to be seen as a complainer. Look, folks, we need to throw that mess away. That's the height of gaslighting. Well, complainers, no. You need to convert that. This is part of that shift. You need to convert that. It's not complaining, but we want to be constructive, right? That's the difference. Complaining is just whining, right, and moaning and groaning. We want to make that transition to be constructive for our team members, right? So that, hey, because otherwise it is just complaining, right? There's a difference, but it's also a cop-out to say, well, I don't want to be seen as a complainer, so I'm not going to provide constructive input. See, it's a cop-out, right? Don't cop out on your team. Now, you're letting your team down, you're letting the customers down when you do that, okay? So you're not working smart, nor are you working hard when you're doing that, okay? You might think you're working harder, but you're definitely not doing it. You're kind of cutting that process off at the knees. So anyway, working smarter and harder. There is a shifting between the two, and you're not. And to say that they're separate, they're not. They're one and the same. Okay, if you're working smarter, you're using your mind, and then if you're using your mind, you're working harder. I know, I've had family and friends and so on and so forth. Some are, say more labor intensive. Some, more tech and intellectually oriented. But either or, they lean either or, and they might look at each other, right? Kind of side eye each other. It's like, well, that's not, they're not doing the work I'm doing. You just feel that, some of that a little bit of that tension in the air, right? You can have whole cultures where people are doing a lot of laborious work, and now they're set at odds to the people who are doing more intellectual stuff, right? So, to do proper prior planning is working smarter, right? But you can't do planning like, you're not, if you have a farm, let's use that. If you have a farm, you're not doing yourself any service if you're just out doing all the labor, right? You've actually got to do some planning too, right? You have to do some strategizing and some forecasting, right? No different with any work, okay? And again, I'm not telling you anything you don't intrinsically know deep down within you, but we've got to get these paradigms away where we're kind of putting people in a box of, well, this and well, that. They don't work hard because they're doing intellectual, or they don't work hard because they're only doing just this labor thing, and it's just one thing they're doing all the time. There may be some truth to both of those statements, right? But we got to understand that these things are necessary. They're necessary to serve our customers. And if it's necessary to serve our customers, one team, one fight, folks. That was the old, I wasn't in the Army, but that was the Army thing, right? It used to be one team, one fight. Look, if you're on a team in your organization, yeah, one team, one fight, serve the customer. And hey, if you're a leader, sometimes I remember getting down, doing these cleaning operations that were deep down cleaning operations. You got to get down there and do some scrubby scrub. You get down there and do some scrubby scrub with your team. I've seen some leaders that wouldn't, they just look down their nose, Or, hey, if your folks are working hard, grab up that mop bucket, take 30 minutes, grab up that mop bucket and clean up, their area. Do a little, show them what it's about, that you're taking as much ownership of everything going on as they are. Okay, and vice versa, right? On the intellectual side, if you're part of the broader team, again, demonstrate that you're willing to put in some ideas and some thought into the overall operation. I want to know what you think about what we have going on, right? Because you're seeing something that I may not be seeing. And now imagine that. This is just facets of the same diamond, right? Everybody has a different view from their position, seeing, and I said physically position, seeing, right, what's going on. And this is how you get better. This is working smarter, folks. Okay. Now, if you get into the more literal aspects of this, you could say, well, working hard equates to productivity. I'm say doing more, right, producing more, etc. You could say, yeah, if you go fall into some of these extremes, working smarter is, well, better quality. If I'm X and I'm Y and I'm Z, then I have better quality. So therefore, there's that side of the house. We'll say labs and testing and all these sorts of things, right? Both are true to a level, right? But also they can be combined. I'll tell you what, if you want to keep up with AI, okay, being able to shift. If you can shift between doing the work, being, a thoughtful planning producer in that regard, an intellectual producer, somebody who's combining problem solver, right? If you can combine these together and you can shift between the two, it'll be a while before AI catches up to you, okay? Because why? It's only going to do what we're telling it to do, okay? And so that's another way we can kind of keep keep the humanity in what we do. People want to buy products that they know that people took some care, right? Some love and care to create and produce. So that's what you want to do. And that's being smart, right? So just remember, folks, it's not smarter or harder. It's both. It's smarter and harder, okay? They're both combined. You're not going to have one without the other. You're not working harder if you're not also working smarter, okay? Because if you're working harder, then you're going to shift and you have more, time to focus in on planning and, maybe some paperwork and things of necessity, documentation, we'll say, papers, less paper, right? More, maybe electronic documentation, right? All those things. So smarter and harder, folks. It's shifting. You need to be able to shift, like a skater shifting from one blade, back and forth, going up the ice. You need to be able to shift your body weight, right? Shift your intellectual capacity, shift your ability to do work, right? Do these things. This is what makes you very useful, right? This will improve, how valuable an asset you are to any organization. But more importantly, to what? To the customer. That's really what we're talking about. It's serving the customer. Yes, you're more important to the organization, and the organization needs to recognize this, but it's the customer. Let's not get too overly focused on, leaders and team members, and it's all about our drama and all the, nonsense. No, what we're doing, we do intelligently, smarter, and then we go after it to get it done harder to serve the customer. It's always the customer is always the answer to every question. Okay. Well, why are we doing it this way? Because the customer XYZ expects this, this, and this. Now, if it doesn't, if all of this doesn't add up to serving the customer, that's probably waste. Okay. Probably an old process that needs to be updated and things of that sort. Again, back to smarter again. But the harder of that is you need to observe the process. So you need to go out there and observe what we have going on, right? To question it smarter, right? Because then we're going to reduce some of that wasted harder, really. It's the waste that we're trying to get rid of. We get rid of that wasted effort, and then we're smart. We create new processes and procedures, etc., and it makes the job easier too, right? So what does that do? That's smart because I'm taking care of folks, and that's making it easier on them to focus on the work, and so my quality is going to be as good or better, right, over the long haul. So much, folks, so much, but smarter and harder. There isn't one or the other, right? Quit gaslighting each other, quit making people feel bad because one group is doing, say, more intellectual work and some folks are doing, hot, sweaty labor, right? Some people, look, folks, there's very few things that you use or that you don't, consume that doesn't come from somebody out there sweating to keep the machines up and this and that and everything else, farms, right? Food, okay? All of it. So keep that in mind. It's smarter and harder, okay? So on that note, be smarter, right? Work harder and be smarter. All right. Hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When you do this, not only open to transform culture, but we're transforming our own lives. But don't forget, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not willing to transform on the inside. So important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.